Everything was good. The whole flock was together, led by the shepherd, and he always led them into pastures green and good. They'd hear his voice and know he loved them and cared for them. It seemed like nothing could go wrong.
Everything was good. The 12 of them were gathered around Jesus, their shepherd, perfectly content to walk with him, talk with him, learn from him, just be with him. They traveled, ate, and drank together. They were a safe and happy community. What could ever go wrong?
Little did they know that just out of sight was a wolf, waiting and watching for one little lamb who would question the voice of the shepherd, who would think he didn't know where the best grass is, who would wonder if following the shepherd's voice would really satisfy him.
But all along there was an enemy, the devil, who was watching for just one disciple who might question if the Messiah would lead him to the things he really wanted. A disciple who would wonder if being together with Jesus and these 11 other disciples living this kind of life, if that was what was truly best for him.
And so one day, when one lamb was not quite finished with a particular patch of clover, and he heard the shepherd's voice calling him in one direction, the rest of the flock began to follow, but he didn't move, though the wolf did.
It wasn't until a $50,000 bottle of perfume was wasted on Jesus' feet. The treasurer, Judas, pined, "Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages." But behind his seemingly generous question was a greedy heart. The predator said, "Aha, an opportunity." And he watched and waited for his moment to separate the man.
Moment after moment passed. The shepherd's voice grew further and further away, but the lamb kept eating, separated from the flock, as the wolf moved into position.
Then Judas, officially convinced that togetherness with Jesus and the other disciples was not the best thing for him, he ventured out. He went to the chief priests and asked, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you?" And because he valued 30 pieces of silver more than Jesus himself, Judas accepted their offer and went and waited for his own moment.
And just then, the lamb saw one particularly enticing bit of clover, and he knew it was exactly in the wrong direction, but he couldn't resist. He went for it.
That moment came when Jesus said, "The one who will betray me is the one to whom I will give this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish." Then, dipping the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas. As soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered into him. And as soon as Judas had taken the bread, he went out.
And the wolf, knowing the lamb was interested in that particular patch of clover, began his approach, and the lamb didn't expect a thing until he felt the teeth of the wolf sink in.
Judas knew where Jesus was going to be that night, and he confidently led the group of soldiers out to capture him. As he watched Jesus and the disciples approach, he smiled to himself and thought, everything is going exactly according to plan. And he walked up to Jesus and kissed him.
He tried to get away, but it was futile. In his final moments, the lamb regretted leaving the flock and the shepherd, but there was nothing he could do.
When Judas saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the 30 silver coins to the chief priests and the elders. "I have sinned," he said, "for I have betrayed innocent blood." And he threw the money into the temple and left.
So the last sound that the lamb heard after he was unable to fight anymore was the voice of the shepherd fading into the distance.
Then Judas went away and hanged himself, separated from the disciples, from Jesus, and from hope forever.
Judas separated himself from anybody who loved him enough to tell him something good, to help him, to guide him. He put himself in an isolated position, and he fell far, and he fell hard. And this is the devil's plan, not just for Judas, but for every single one of us. He wants, like a predator, to isolate us from everything else, to get us away from the herd so that we can't be helped, so that we are on our own, to isolate us spiritually, to isolate us emotionally, to isolate us physically, whatever he can do, so that when you fall, there's nobody there to help you up. Whatever he can do so that you are in a position that once things go badly and you don't feel like you have the strength anymore, there's no one else who can intervene to save you. The devil prowls around like a roaring lion, the Bible says, seeking those he may devour, and those who are isolated are much easier for him to devour.
The devil is a very real threat, and we deal with that threat in a couple different ways. First of all, we fight against the devil or defend against him. When we hear that someone is out there, in this case the devil, prowling around trying to devour us or separate us off by ourselves, get us alone, our first instinct is to say, batten down the hatches, put up the defenses, figure out his tactics, fight against him. And those are good first instincts to have. Another thing we do is say, we're going to try to fix the problem by serving one another. And so we'll say things like call one another, or these days, Zoom call one another. Strengthen your community. Don't let anyone become isolated. Reach out to the person who you think might be in danger of becoming a Judas-like character someday. Now, by all means, do those things. Fight against, defend against the devil. Strengthen your communities, serve one another, but don't ever let yourself believe, even for a second, that any of those actions are the actual solution. That would be the height of foolishness, because the devil also tempts us to think that we ourselves can be the solution to our own problem. And that's just not true. We can try, but we can't be. We can't fix it. We can't win the battle by ourselves. The devil is stronger than we are by ourselves. We can't throw the perfect game. We can't ace the test. We cannot produce the solution. But just because we can't produce it doesn't mean there isn't one. There is.
Everything was good. Humanity lived together in perfect harmony and walked and talked in cooperation with God. They'd hear his voice and know that he cared for and loved them. It seemed as if nothing could go wrong.
It was all very good. The triune God had created a universe in perfect balance and kept it going with perfect love. He graciously shared his own image with humanity. He invited them into his harmony, and he promised to sustain them forever. Nothing needed to go wrong.
Little did they know that a lie would slither out of the tree that had none of their best interests in mind. He loved only himself, and he would teach humanity to do the same, questioning God and whether or not he could really satisfy them.
Nevertheless, God knew that even if an enemy, lying and blaspheming, disrupted everything he had made, he would simply remain faithful. His work of loving what he had created wouldn't stop. It would change as he met humanity's needs in a different, saving way.
And so when the snake suggested that the fruit did more than God had said, even though she had no reason at all to question him, Eve looked at the fruit and asked a question that has led humanity astray ever since. Did God really mean what he said?
And so, one day when he watched them choose a baseless lie over his proven promise, he kept on loving them with his signature, merciful, undeserved love, and he made them a new promise, even though he hadn't changed and they had.
It's remarkable that any human, since we live and think and function for so short a time in the grand scheme of things, would ever think to question what God has said. But we do. Each one of us asks our own version of that question every single day.
And God watched as this promise remained even as generations of humanity came and went. And he spoke it over and over again, even though they never quite fully understood it. And when the time had fully come, he himself came to earth to fulfill it.
As such, we've asked that doubting question and picked the fruit billions of times in the lifetime of every human since. We don't resist. We go for it.
And fulfill it he did. Even when the enemy offered him ways to skip out and avoid what was coming, he never gave up, sustained by his desire to share the love that he knew so well.
And we know we're wrong to do it. Our sin embarrasses us, and we hide behind pride and pain and fear and a willingness to do anything to avoid admitting who we really are.
In fact, it was that love that motivated Jesus to pursue the cross. He was aware of every heartbreak and suffering that it would bring, and he embraced every accusation and beating and rejection.
And so our attempt to get what we wanted for ourselves has left us ashamed of how weak we are. We have sinned, and there's nothing we can do.
Until, in an almost incomprehensible moment, the one on the cross cried out to the one in heaven, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" Because the love that held the Trinity together was redirected away from Jesus toward each one of us.
We should have no hope at all. We should die in despair. But our last words are not our own. They come from God, from a Trinity that broke itself apart, from a forsaken Christ.
And when he said, "It is finished," his time in isolation was complete, and so was ours. So we can say along with him, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit."